is like the former president of Uganda. And so he used this to manipulate, because as far as Uganda is concerned, there's like the divide between the North and the South. Because in the history of Uganda, the North dominated the politics of Uganda's right immediately after independence. And then when Museveni came into power in 1986, the South was scared of the North because of like power abuse and all the atrocities that they committed while they were in power. And so it became like his rhetoric to say, if you don't support me, then the North will take over. And if the North takes over, you will go through what you went through, you know, when the North was in power. And so, and I would be interested in Victor's take on this, because I personally, as a Ugandan, I'm very skeptical about sanctions and cutting of aid, because I don't believe that that's the way that can help fighting, or supporting the gay rights. Because I feel like the reason why Museveni actually signed the bill is precisely because the West was so interested in gay rights more than any other. And because then this becomes his tool that, you know, if I show Ugandans that I can stand against the West and sign this bill in spite of the West, then they will vote for me. And it's evident even on Facebook, because I think I've lived, this is my second year in the US, and I'm very active on Facebook. But you will find that so many Ugandans, like after he signed the bill, so many Ugandans were like, this time he has my vote. This time I'm gonna vote for him. I don't care everything else that he's ever done before. So like the overwhelming support and cry out from the West actually just played into the politics of Museveni lobbying for votes.
I just want to add in that, personally, I will never forgive. I'll never forgive the colonialists. I will never forgive the US religious right for what they have done in my country. For me, and in other parts of Africa, I know that the last bit of it was done by President Museveni, our president. But also, I learned along the way that it has been a process that didn't just start with President Museveni. You know, like, let's do something about homosexuality and so that I get votes. I learned along the way that there has been a lot of work and investment in these kind of things by the US religious right. From long time ago, we didn't know. We used to come for holidays every end of year, and the president's wife used to organize this big gathering then in the mid-1990s for us, the youth, where they would even like kind of get married to Jesus, like commit like for life to Jesus. There was a huge black cross like this, and we saw so many things. Don't never, having sex before marriage, and like a lot of things with big penalties, spiritual penalties, death. And I remember that that time she was working with American pastors. I remember Pastor Evans. They used to have huge crusades in Uganda. And then, when the bill was tabled, there was a lot of information that came from researchers, including you, Jeff, and political research associates. And I connected all the dots. Because these guys had been in Uganda, have been in Africa, long before the bill was tabled.
Yeah, 40 years, 50 years.
Yeah, for years. There's this,
decades.
one of the purpose-driven life.
Purpose-driven life, Rick Warren,
yeah. Has been in Uganda dining with our president for so long. Pat Robertson. And
30 years for Pat Robertson.
A network that we have had, like from when I was, like what do you call it here? Senior 1, senior 2, senior 3. I don't know what you call it here. Something great. But all these now we begin to connect the dots. They've been working. It has been a process. They had a better strategy than us. They had a better strategy than people who fight for human rights. They had a better strategy. They knew that they were investing in something that would pay off. Even then, I'm sure the president still had votes via the war in Gulu and so many other things, and homosexuality was not an issue. He has said before, let them roam around as long as they do not kiss on the streets. I'm okay with that. That's what our president has said so many times. And then, finally, the harvest. Why Uganda? Uganda was ready. This process is going on in so many countries. It's going on in Nigeria, in West Africa, it's going on in Southern Africa, but Uganda was ready for the harvest. And then I believe that our leaders also saw opportunity in that. They're saying the lies have been told, the last man to come and his group, not the very last one, but the one who brought all the trouble was Scott Lively and his friends, which Jeff most likely will talk about more. And when they came, of course, it was about time to do the harvest, to start harvesting. They pushed for legislation. We already had legislation. They pushed for it. They went to Parliament. We saw them on TV dining with our legislators. And they advised that the only way to deal with this is if you legislate. And then before we knew it, a member of parliament was being given leave to go and draft. The draft comes out and it has the same language that the American evangelicals that year in 2009, around March, were using to lie to Ugandans. These homosexuals are breaking the families. They are killing the family. They're killing family values. They are raping your children. They are sodomizing your children. They are recruiting your young people into homosexuality. This country is cursed. And because of this, the sin of homosexuality is going to lead to the suffering. We don't want to suffer. Ugandans don't want to suffer curses. This is what they are telling them. And Ugandans don't want to lose their children to rape. This is what they are convincing them is happening. They come with another bunch of Americans who claim to be ex-gays, who some of them I think now are saying, okay, we're just confused. Also testifying to this, that this happens. And then our people bought it. And then I think that is when the politicians realized this can be a nice way to win the favor and into popularity and votes for our people. We shall sacrifice this group of people. It is working for us very well. And so I feel that there's so many players, but it starts from somewhere, and then along the way, many people jump on with their own motives.
I would add, I've reported on this in Russia, Kenya, and Uganda, and of course in the United States, and what Victor says is exactly right. The language is identical. I don't mean similar. I mean whole phrases lifted and appearing in these radically different cultures with different political settings and so on. But what you say about them being, this American influence being there a long time, that really goes back to the beginning of the Museveni regime and one organization, the Fellowship, looking at Museveni and the Reagan administration thinking that he was, in their terms, a left-wing fanatic, and they needed to bring him into the ideological orbit. And so there was a real sort of, who's going to give him more money? And you can go back and sort of find these documents, and which they brought him to Washington, and they said, this is what we're going to give you. That was, you talked about the promises Museveni made at the beginning. It was almost sort of over before it began. As soon as he moved and sort of made that deal, said, I'm willing to be a satellite of the US, even as, that's the interesting thing, he's getting these votes for his defiance of the US, even as he says, yeah, thanks for the guns, the money is still flowing, the relationships are still there, and Uganda is still essentially fighting proxy wars for the United States in the region. And that goes back right to the very beginning of his regime. And this bill is only the latest of the issues. The central relationship is always one about empire and its subjects.
And meanwhile, I think the human rights movement in the West does share some complicity in this as well, in that I think we have not been very effective at keeping the anti-homosexuality bill in the context of these other issues. We've been so narrowly focused on the homosexuality bill, that even Ugandans that might otherwise be a bit tolerant or accepting of LGBT people are wary of this, what they see as just another exercise of American imperial power in the guise of LGBT rights.
Why don't we go to Payne and then you can go from there?
It's so interesting to hear you talk about the connection between the politics in Uganda and the influence of the right-wing Christian movement here, because of course many of us know that George W. Bush got into power, got elected riding on the anti-homosexual sentiments in this country. My question is how far back this anti-homosexual movement goes in two countries, Nigeria and Uganda, which were colonized by the British. And right, am I right?
The British passed the first anti-homosexuality law.
Exactly, because I've lived in Singapore for a number of years. They also have an anti-homosexual bill. So I just wonder if all this goes back to the British and to colonialism, as you pointed out, and it may not be native, right, to Uganda, and to Africa. Is that, am I right?
That's correct, yeah.
Well, what we know and agree with is that homophobia was brought to Africa by the colonialists. There's a lot of evidence of homosexual lifestyle in Africa during the pre-colonial days, but when they came and carried the penal code, especially the British penal codes,
Yes.
into Africa, those penal codes were fighting